189. The Myth of Nature. Chalcedon Position Paper, number 133, April 1991. Although there have been attempts in this century to give profundity and religious status to myth, its basic meaning still remains. However much it is assumed to be historical or real, a myth is fictitious. It is a popular fable which is unrelated to reality. Attempts by some theologians to see biblical history as mythological have told us more about these scholars than about the Bible. How can nature be called mythical? After all, we are surrounded by a real world. The mythical element enters when men approach the world around us with false presuppositions and read into its meanings and powers which are not there. The Greek philosophers were very prone to this. For Plato and Aristotle, rightness and justice meant being true to nature. But, quote, nature, end quote, is a collective noun, not a single entity. The Stoics summed up morality in a brief precept: follow nature. For them, instead of being a fallen realm, nature was normative and a source of law. This classical faith was revived by the Enlightenment, and reason was seen as the high point of nature, together with order. The mechanistic philosophies and science of the 18th century reflected this view. In time, however, this view of nature took a new form in Romanticism. The great influences here came from Rousseau, Wordsworth and Shelley, and, to a lesser degree, from William Blake. Nature was seen as something more than the natural phenomena which surrounds us. It is a force which lies behind them and is inherent in them. For Hegel, this force was Geist, or spirit, the world spirit, constantly incarnating itself in the changing forms of nature. This nature spirit was seen as constantly changing or evolving, so that yesterday's incarnation could not be the spirit of today. Since nature's expression is constantly changing and evolving, how can a man know what is right and wrong? In any absolute sense, good and evil in this view do not exist, only temporary forms of good and evil. The sociologist Émile Durkheim thus saw the criminal as potentially an evolutionary pioneer, since the criminal is always pushing against the boundaries of the present order. These ideas concerning nature made Darwin inevitable, and several men came up with the same theory at about the same time. There had to be evolution, because the prevailing myth of nature required it. The myth of nature is implicitly anti-scientific, because it demands veneration for things science wants to investigate. It is not surprising that environmentalists and, quote, animal rights, end quote, advocates are hostile to scientists who are confronted with members of their own intellectual family opposing them. In the late 19th century, the logic of the myth of nature was radically developed by the Marquis de Sade. He rejected any transfer of biblical morality into modern thought. He advocated a world beyond good and evil, beyond morality, and without God. For him, there was only one crime: Christianity, because it opposed to nature the triune God, and because it regarded nature as a fallen rather than a normative realm. For Sade, every kind of perversion had to be practiced religiously as the fulfillment of nature. Lawlessness was, for him, an affirmation of nature as against God. Sade dedicated his life and writings to the destruction of Christianity and the Christian man. He has been rightly called by some the most powerful influence in our time. Sade was not too far out of line with his era. His more vocal statement of what others believed in practice was what got him into trouble. The théâtre gaillard practiced what many espoused. Thus, in April 1791, in the Palais Royal, a public theatre had a performance in which two naked players, supposedly savages, went through the act of coition. There were in Paris secret pornologic clubs, and in some instances, Sade was simply recounting with his comments what happened in these establishments. The operators kidnapped poor girls, and the police protected the patrons, according to Dr. Ivan Bloch. The corrupt patrons were highly placed in state, society, and the church. This corruption was not limited to Paris. It existed in Naples especially, in London, and elsewhere. Depravity had become the new virtue, the expression of nature. Its practice was associated sometimes with enlightenment and intellectual status. Christian morality was for the masses, useful in keeping them in line, or as Voltaire said, to keep them from stealing from their masters. In the English-speaking world, this religion of nature suffered a setback. First with the work of Whitefield and Wesley, and then, in the 19th century, with the evangelical revival. Since Darwin, however, this false religion has spread to all classes. A major expression of this faith came to powerful expression in the several Kinsey reports. Their thesis is a simple one. Whatever exists in nature is right and good. Homosexuality, child molestation, and other sexual acts normally regarded as perverse are all, quote, natural, end quote, and therefore good. If our standards come from nature and not from God and His Word, this is correct. But, since God is the living God, and this idea of nature is a myth, then only God's law-word can be our standard. We are thus faced on all fronts with a religious war, the devotees of nature on the one hand, and the people of God on the other. Sadly, Romanticism long ago infected the church deeply, and the result was pietism. In pietism, the emphasis is on feeling, not on God's law-word. Salvation for pietism is an emotional experience, not the objective fact of Christ's atonement on the cross. To stress feelings or emotions is to rely on nature, not on Christ. One of our men had an encounter with a man who is very hostile to marriage. It is, for him, legalism, and very habitual in his fornication, with, quote, Christian, end quote, girls only, as an expression of love. He was emphatic that anyone who takes the law seriously is unsaved. This is a form of Baalism masquerading as Christianity. The natural world, like us, is God's creation. It is, according to St. Paul, in bondage, and it groans and travails, waiting for the glorious redemption to be completed in the new creation. Romans chapter 8, verses 18 to 23. We can no more look to nature for norms and laws than we can look to ourselves or to the state. Yet modern man looks everywhere except to the Lord. As long as man turns aside from Christ, our King and Redeemer, and from His law and reign, so long shall he wander in the wilderness of sin and judgment.